All right, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to Lions Spirit Day here at OCC. Just wanted to give a little shout out to our team before we get started. But what I would like to do first and foremost is to introduce our speaker today. We're very, very fortunate to have Charles Barker. Mr. Barker is a seasoned environmental consultant with over 30 years of experience in the field of geology and environmental compliance. He holds a BS in geology from Arizona State University, an MA in geology from Boston University, and has advanced field geology training from the University of Michigan. He is a certified professional geologist and has extensive experience managing and implementing compliance programs for corporate clients and communities. His work spans a variety of environmental projects, including water, waste, and air regulations, where he has trained personnel, conducted phase 1 and 2 environmental site assessments, and managed Superfund remedial investigations. He has also worked on numerous environmental compliance issues and has developed and led training programs in areas such as stormwater management, spill prevention, and ISO 14001 environmental management systems. In addition to his consulting career, Mr. Barker has taught at several institutions, including Oakland Community College, Wayne State University, and Wayne County Community College. He's also authored several children's books on geology and the environment. He's an active speaker at seminars and provides educational talks to both professionals and students. So, welcome, Charles. I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Hey, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that introduction. And I must say that the one thing that stuck with me is when you mentioned Arizona State University, I kind of wish we were there now in Tempe, where it's probably 75 degrees or something. So let me see. I'm going to share my screen and let me know. Can you see the first slide?
You've done it.
Okay, great. Thanks. So anyway, I really appreciate the opportunity. What we're going to do is cover a lot of stuff today, basically dealing with regulations and maybe how paralegals can get involved or help with law firms and so on when dealing with environmental regulations. So let's take a look. What we're going to cover today is why we have these regulations, who enforces them, which would be the EPA, and then we'll get into how Michigan deals with them in our state agency. What some major regulations are and who they apply to. You might be surprised to hear some of that. And then maybe some lessons from the field that I might be able to share with paralegals. Okay. All righty. So, yeah, I probably don't have to cover this slide because Sarah, you kind of mentioned it all, and I appreciate that. I guess the main thing in terms of like my experience in talking about environmental regulations is, yeah, I'm a geologist, and you might be saying, well, I thought we'd be hearing from an attorney, but in geology, we learn obviously about groundwater systems and how things get contaminated, how to clean them up, and so on. But in environmental consulting, the field is probably a lot different than a lot of people think, in that we usually get hired by law firms, okay, and or attorneys that need to have their clients be in compliance with regulations. So the world of environmental consulting is, I would say, 90% working for attorneys, okay, and working for law firms, again, to keep their clients in compliance. So, and I can skip the rest because Sarah so nicely covered all that. So just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about when we're looking at regulatory compliance, these are kind of almost put here, but they're from our proposals at the consulting firm I used to work for. So, like, for instance, we provide guidance on the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 40, Chapter, and I got my stuff blocking it here. Chapter 1, subchapter C, part 63, subpart ZZZZ. That's the kind of stuff we do, which you might be like, what? In fact, I probably should have an honorary law degree. I'm just sort of kidding there, but because this is what we do is we try to like figure out these regulations and how to get people, companies in compliance with them. Here's another one that I had to put on the boiler MACT. What's that? Well, it's for a boiler. The maximum achievable control technology is for its regulations. And so that's 40 CFR part 63, subpart J, 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 J. Did I say six J's there? So, I mean, it's really wild because there's so many regulations, and that's what we try to dig into to make sure you're in compliance with it. And going back to subpart ZZZZ, I asked a friend at the agency at the Department of Environmental Quality, what was called back there. I'm like, I'm trying to help understand this client understand this regulation. Can you kind of spell it out for me? And he's at the agency, the Department of Environmental Quality. He's like, we're still trying to figure it out ourselves. So it's pretty wild. The other thing we do is there's other regulations, some called Form R, which is under what we call the toxics release inventory. And what is that? Well, that goes back to in 1984. There was a Union Carbide plant in Bhopal, India. What happened there was in the middle of the night, a valve broke and 2000 released a toxic gas. 2,000 people in that town died in their sleep, were killed instantly from that gas. And, you know, as it turns out, in a lot of these disasters in hindsight, well, the alarm had been out for maybe repair and then delays and delays. But anyway, so the valve broke and a lot of people died. So EPA heard of that and went, wow. I mean, this was in Bhopal, India. What do we have here in neighborhoods in the United States that could, if something went bad, a valve broke, cause huge crisis in towns all over the US. So they came up with this toxic release inventory, which means that companies that handle a certain amount of toxic chemicals, they're called TRI chemicals, Form R chemicals, they have to say where they're stored, what they do with them, and all that. And the fines are crazy if they don't do it. All right, so just a little background on the history of environmental regulations. Kind of like in the 1960s, EPA was founded in 1970. So before that, it was pretty much go ahead and dump your stuff out the back door. There's no regulations, and that was pretty bad. A lot of smog. A couple of rivers lit on fire. The Cuyahoga and Cleveland. Actually, the river started to burn. Okay, that's not good. I think the Rouge River in Detroit and certain areas burned the river. So that was kind of like, wow, I think we got to do something to sort of reduce these discharges to the water. So again, 1970, the EPA was formed and came up with the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, these waste regulations saying, hey, you can't just dump this stuff out in the streams. So environmental laws were passed, and then so the regulations that we're going to be talking a lot about this afternoon were put in place to sort of meet those laws. Okay. Now, it might be kind of surprising is that I think most people think that environmental regulations might apply to, these amalgamated petroleum plants and some real nasty, scary facilities belching out contaminants into the air and the water, when actually there's a lot of facilities that are regulated that have a lot of emissions that we don't really think they would. For instance, this large hospital, I won't mention the name, but it's public record anyway, probably. But anyway, the point is they installed something like, I don't know, three boilers, right, for heat and air conditioning and so on, and three emergency generators. Well, they didn't get permits from that from the regulatory agency, so they got a $175,000 fine that they had to fork over. And they were also put on a consent order that for a couple of years they had to, basically prove every month that they're being good and didn't have any other problems. So, I mean, a hospital is highly regulated and a big emitter of contaminants, let's call it that, or pollutants. The EPA is six what we call criteria pollutants, and oxides of nitrogen is one. And hospitals, many of the big ones, have permits because they have the potential to emit over 100 tons per year. All right. So again, it's not just the big bad manufacturing firms that have regulations they need to comply with. So the EPA is sort of the starting point for laws and regulations related to the environment, and they develop and enforce these regulations. I work for a contractor for EPA doing groundwater protection stuff. And it's kind of interesting. I was learning more about EPA. They have a criminal enforcement division, and they're really serious. Okay, they carry firearms, this division. They have a office in Ann Arbor, and this is for the worst of the worst polluters, or maybe not even that. Frankly, I was talking to some couple months ago, and I was surprised to hear, like, if a facility has to, let's say, report their uh, emissions on a certain regulation, and they falsify those records and send it to the agency in an email, it's wire fraud. And if they mail it in, it's mail fraud. So these folks are serious. I was like, whoa. Um, Again, some of the things that can go wrong is when there's violations. I won't read all of these, but you could see that there's this shop owner. They were tweaking. Some states, and I've lived in Massachusetts, where you have to have emissions testing on your vehicle every so often. Well, some of these people that do the tests kind of tweak the the devices such that the emissions look lower than they are. Well, this guy got 6 months in federal prison for doing that. And I think you may have heard about Volkswagen a few years ago. My office is in the Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor has a vehicle emissions testing center. Maybe some of you have driven by that. Every year, auto companies have to give the EPA the new model vehicle, and they drive it over there, or however they deliver it, and they test the emissions. I think Volkswagen kind of gave them a car that wasn't really, how should we put it, representative of the fleet, and got a huge fine. I think it might be the largest fine ever for an environmental thing, but don't quote me on that. Anyway, so on the bottom one there, you can see there's a California man fraud scheme involving renewable fuel credits. And this is not a typo of mine. On May 19th, 2923, that's from the EPA website. So they actually can do future violations. No, I'm just kidding. Have you ever seen, what was that Minority Report where they, arrested people for things they would do in the future? So that's my little joke. 900 years from now. Um, Anyway, so what about environmental regulations in Michigan? Well, again, as I said, EPA starts off with like, here are the rules you got to follow. And then states can say, hey, you know what? Um, like Michigan, like we want to be the ones that administer those regulations, and they, file a sort of a request, and the EPA will say grant them what's called primacy, meaning they can administer these regulations as a state entity. Okay. And they can do that as long as the state doesn't have some higher like emissions limits than the federal has. So let's say if the federal rule is you can't discharge more than 5 parts per billion of benzene into the water. I'm just making stuff up. The state can't say, all right, well, you can do 10. We're okay with it. No, you have to meet or be more stringent than the federal regulation. So in Michigan, we have the Michigan Department of what is it? Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, Eagle, and Eagle used to be MDEQ and used to be MDEP and all these other things. So they go through a lot of stationery when they change their names. I bet over time, and it's well, I'll be quiet about that. So as far as these environmental regulations, they're very detailed and they've got a language of their own, or certainly acronyms that are alphabet soup times 1,000. And here's just a few of them that you can see. Some make sense, others, might be new. But so here is when I was with a consulting firm, we got an air permit for United Solar Avonics. They made solar cells. Actually, it's really cool. They were in Auburn Hills. They made these really thin solar cells, almost like shingles that you could have on your roof. And they had at least two plants in Auburn Hills, and then we got air permits for I think two more in Greenville, Michigan. Unfortunately, I don't understand exactly why, but they're out of business. They went out of business like 10 years ago or something. Anyway, this is a screenshot from an air permit. Okay. So a manufacturing facility that's making widgets or solar panels has to get an air permit if they have something coming out of a smokestack. All right. And there are certain exemptions, but this is an example of one where they had limits on their emissions. And this is also another sort of example that some things you think were really clean aren't necessarily. So this is what you get when you're making solar cells. You can see VOCs stands for volatile organic compounds, and HAP is a hazardous air pollutant. So you can see the pollutant on the left. The next column is the equipment and the line at the plant that manufactures these things, and then there's this limit. So you can see, well, let's say we are past June 1st, 2005. So the limit was 9.5 tons per year. Tons per year. Okay. And when I first started working with air permitting people, I thought, ton into the air, that must be some other unit of measure other than 2,000 pounds that I'm familiar with. But no, that is 9.5 tons, 2,000 pounds per year. Um, so when a company has an air permit, it's not like getting a driver's license or something where you just file it and say, okay, that we got the permit, we're good to go. No, there's obligations that companies have, and this is something paralegals might want to be checking for to make sure the company's in compliance. Is you got to do a lot of stuff. Okay, like here 1.9, the permitting shall keep the following information on a monthly basis: the gallons of material, the VOC, the volatile organic content, excuse me, the volatile organic compound content, the VOC emission calculations, HAPs, hazardous air pollutants, all this stuff has to be kept in records. And if not, you can get some of those fines that we talked about. All right. Well, I just mentioned that top part. Inspections. So the agency can do inspections and does on manufacturing facilities or hospitals, you name it. Um, and when the agency shows up, they can be announced or unannounced, or they can set up an appointment. The types of inspections I do, they're unannounced. You just stop in, and those are quite typical. Um, and if you're working with a company or at a company, you can't tell the agency, I'm sorry, Bill's the guy in charge of the air permit. He's out, he's on vacation. No, they want to see it. They want to see the information that day when they're there. And then you can't tell the agency, hey, I've seen this. You can't come in here. Get away. Well, usually what will happen in that case is the inspector will go, okay, all right. And they'll get the company that refused entry. By the way, EPA has a zero tolerance for um, people denying entry to a place. And so they'll get a registered letter. And then if that doesn't bite, then they'll get a call or something. But ultimately, if they still refuse, you get federal marshals to join you in the inspection. And there's no, not getting in. And that's a good thing. You guys remember, I don't know, that a couple of years ago in our area, there was that green ooze coming out on I-696. That was a facility a plating facility was closed down, but in the basement, there was a big hole in the ground and they were dumping toxic plating materials that made its way several hundred feet into a drain that discharged out onto 696. And that was the green ooze thing. Maybe you guys recall that. And that's another reason why you got to gain entry, is to see if that stuff's going on. All righty. Let's see. In terms of compliance and paralegals involvement with this, is that a lot of this information or the data that's generated by a company or for a law firm, like I say, most of the work we do is for a law firm, is if we're taking samples of groundwater or discharge from a facility, you got to use a certified lab if the agency requires that. What's a certified lab? Well, there's certain laboratories, analytical laboratories that EPA will designate as approved. And the way they keep their certification is that every year or so they get a little package in the mail from EPA, a little vial in it. And the EP says, tell us what's in this and how many parts per billion. And if the lab doesn't get it right, they're off the list. Holding time of samples, what's that? So when you collect a sample, there's a certain amount of time you have to get it to the lab. If it's over that, the sample's no good. Can't be used in court, let's say. All right. It's usually a 24-hour holding time for volatile organic compounds. If you turn it into the lab a day late, they analyze it, still charge you $500, and you try to go to court and say, hey, here's the results. They'll say, no, this is no good. um, and throw it out. So temperature of samples, they have to be a certain temperature. If they're not, the data is no good. Air bubbles and headspace. I don't want to get into too much of the details, but here's my bottle of water. Let's say if this is a sample, um, you can't have, I don't mean to do this, you can't have any bubbles in that sample if you're testing it for volatile organic compounds. And if you do, then the sample's no good. Why? Because the volatile organic compounds want to go into the air, want to go into that bubble, and the lab is going to test the water. So again, in a court case, throw it right out. There's bubbles in the sample. And we won't get into all these details about preservative, but again, sample analysis has to be done exactly right, or the data is no good. It always irks me. I don't know if you guys saw that movie, Aaron Brockovich. It's a good movie. And Aaron Brockovich is a real person. We actually did a project for an attorney that Aaron Brockovich had sort of hired in Western Michigan to work on. Anyhow, it always irks me. And there's one scene where she's collecting a sample to test for hexavalent chromium, and she has no safety gear and no gloves, and the bottle is maybe, well, it's a little more than a Starbucks cup, but not much better. And she's taking, I'm like, so anyway, there's a lot of detail that has to be done for that. Why do we have these regulations? Well, the first site I worked on, and we'll wrap it up in about 10 minutes here, and then you can ask any questions. So the first site I worked on after grad school was a Superfund site. What is a Superfund site? That is the worst of hazardous waste disposal sites. Okay, Superfund means when somebody misheard me once when I said super, they thought it was super fun. No, super fund, super for a lot, and fund for money. So the EPA has this super fund. It's from taxes on gasoline and chemicals and so on, and it just builds and builds. And it is used to investigate and clean up sites where the potential what is it called? PRP, potentially responsible party. In fact, probably more than potential, the responsible party is either out of business or, can't be found. And so EPA can use Superfund money to clean up a site. In this case, I worked on this Superfund site in Peterborough, New Hampshire. And I don't know if Peterborough is a neat town. It is, I don't know if you're familiar with Our Town by Thornton Wilder. Peterborough is Grover's Corner. He used Peterborough as Grover's Corner in the play Our Town. So anyway, really neat, quintessential New England town. Just don't drink the water. It's highly contaminated. One other point too in the legal world about this site is that the responsible party was New Hampshire Ball Bearings. They had a choice. EPA gave them the choice. It said, you can clean this up yourselves, or you can have EPA do it. Okay. And they're like, okay, well, and they said, well, if EPA does it, we will give you a bill when we're done for 3 times what it took for us to clean it up. Treble damages. And so they're like, okay, well, we'll get started. And they have EPA gives them a work plan that's about this thick, if you remember Yellow Pages. So actually, I just threw this slide in. This is from a little trip I was doing some inspections on, and it's not just far-flung places. Here's a place near Lansing where it has this do not drink the water in effect. I'm not sure this is the greatest graphic. I think it's someone drinking water, but it could be the other way around. Here's Peterborough, New Hampshire, near Boston. I used to work in an environmental consulting firm in Boston. And so that's the location. I felt bad when I said just don't drink the water. That's kind of a flippant remark because it's really serious stuff. Here is from an EPA work plan. The incremental lifetime cancer risks estimated for the ingestion of this water. So it's serious, serious stuff. People get sick from drinking contaminated water, and that's serious business. So here is the site, just to give you an example of how some of these investigations are done. This is New Hampshire ball bearings. This, I don't know if you, can you see my cursor or not? Yeah. Okay. So here is the South Municipal Water Supply well that feeds the town of Peterborough, or did. It was closed down. When it starts pumping, this is why I guess geologists get into this field. It draws in the plume of contamination. You shut off the well, and the plume's over here. Plume is from the French plume for feather, the shape of the contaminants, and this is really nasty stuff. This is the cancer causing stuff. And it's perchloroethylene, which is dry cleaning fluid. But they use it as a degreaser. Okay, let's see. All righty. And this is just something, again, talking about the severity of this. This is the Southwell site we just looked at. $13.6 million order for additional cleanup at the South Municipal Water Supply. So very, very serious stuff. Lots of money. And this is 30 years after they started paying for it. This is another 13.6 million on top of probably who knows how many millions before that over 30 years. All right. So legal issues. Once that company, New Hampshire Ball Bearings, was tied up in all this stuff and shelling out all this money. They first thing they did was tell their insurance company, "Hey, here's a payment for you." And the insurance company said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa! We don't cover that. Tornado maybe, but not this." And this is early on in this whole environmental field. We don't cover groundwater contamination for municipal wells. So the company sued their insurance company for coverage, and I had to do some interviews with the employees. And it was kind of amazing is that a lot of these employees were really great, workers, would company folks, totally dedicated to the job, but they didn't know that when you dump something under the ground, it goes down and contaminates groundwater that a quarter mile away, there's a municipal well that could pull it in. They thought it would evaporate. So, and then there was depositions, all kinds of stuff. So this isn't just, again, stuff very far away in Battle Creek, Michigan here. I've worked on this Superfund site as well. The origins of that was that the city of Battle Creek thought they'd be nice and go out to these outlying places that were outside the municipal water supply and were on private wells and say, "Hey, we'll test your well. Just want to make sure you're not, drinking contaminated well water." And so they went to this church, sampled their water from the faucet, in the kitchen, and then got the analysis back. It was screaming high with volatile organic compounds, chlorinated solvents. They went back to the church and sat them down and said, "Gosh, you know what? I hate to tell you this, but your well is highly contaminated." And the people on the board at the church were like, "What are you talking about? We're on city water." Oh, so they found out the city of Battle Creek's water supply was really contaminated. Wait a minute. Let's see. Okay. So, all right. So wrapping up here pretty soon, folks, is because I could talk all day on this, but I know we don't have all day. So again, just other bits and pieces about environmental regulations. There's real estate transactions before you buy a property. A commercial property, residential, you don't have to do a phase one environmental site assessment or ESA. It should be done to avoid buying property that could be contaminated. If you don't do a phase one, worst case scenario, and you buy a property, people have gone through this, and then later find out it was a gas station. There's tanks in the ground that nobody knew about. They're leaking. They contaminate your neighbor's water supply and your water supply, and your property is all contaminated. Guess what? You just bought the problem. And a typical gas station cleanup, $1 million, easy. So maybe you're retiring, and this happened where you buy a flower shop. Somebody buys a flower shop. I mean, a piece of property wants to build a flower shop. Turns out it was an old gas station. They're on the hook for $1 million to clean it up. And they're like, whoa. So a lot of the banks would be getting these properties back that they had given people a mortgage for. And they're like, look, I'm walking away. And so banks came up in the 1980s with this thing called a phase one environmental site assessment, that before you get a mortgage, you've got to do a phase one because the bank doesn't want to wind up with that property and a huge bill to clean it up. So that's the origin of phase one site assessment, environmental site assessment. And I was around in the 80s back when this first started. And it was like the Wild West. Some people would do it one way, some people would do another way. And then this American Society of Testing and Materials said, look, whoa, we got to have a standard for everybody doing a phase one environmental site assessment that's the same. Okay. ASTM figures out how high and wide the door is in your house and how high up a table is. They have all these standards. So they came up with a standard for a phase one. So basically, what a phase one, it looks at the history of the property. There's no sampling, there's no groundwater, there's no soil testing. It's just paperwork as far as the history of a property to see if there's any potential risk of contaminants being there. If there is, we call it a recognized environmental condition or a REC. And got to have all these acronyms. And then that leads to a phase two environmental site assessment if there are some wrecks and you do sampling and testing of soil and groundwater. That's not cheap. A phase one is maybe, I don't know, $2,000. Phase two, you can't get out of probably for less than $10,000. So, and then even if it's contaminated, there's other things you can do to get out of that. All right, so let's wrap this up in 5 minutes. Does that sound good, Sarah? All right, so I'll get going here. Let's see, a lot of regs covering air, water, waste. Paralegals have great sort of opportunities to be involved with that because it's needed. And there's even voluntary programs for companies. One's called ISO 14001 Environmental Management Systems. That's from ISO is the International Society of I don't know, regulations or something like that. I can't remember what it is. Internet. Anyway, so it's a voluntary program. They ISO 9001, for instance, is what auto companies do for quality. 9001 is quality, you know, like, oh, the wheels are fine or whatever. They do. And then ISO 14001 is environmental management. Okay. And places like Ford, GM, other big companies have required in the last 20 years or so, if you're going to supply us with a service or a product, you've got to be ISO 14001 certified. Okay. So everybody scrambled to get that. One thing that I'll leave with is that companies can't do greenwashing. What is greenwashing? That is like saying your product or your service even is good for the environment. In fact, I think just today I was looking that the European Union or some such entity over in Europe had started a law, established a law, anti-greenwashing law that gets companies in trouble if they say they're environmentally friendly and they're not. They have to prove all these things. So one thing that irked me is when you see this garbage truck says think green, think clean. We run on clean burning natural gas. Natural gas is not clean burning. Okay. In fact, I don't even know why they're pushing that so much. As long as they pick up the garbage, I'm happy. You don't have to impress me any further. But here is when you're looking at claims like this, you just look at the EPA's emission factors. Emissions are what goes out a tailpipe or a stack when you burn something. Okay, and there's factors that are available for that. Here's some here for fuel type: kilograms of CO2, which is the greenhouse gas per unit, gasoline, so on. So here's one: biodiesel. Everybody may think, oh, we'll use biodiesel because it's clean. No, it's not clean. This is Willie Nelson's truck. Biodiesel, 9.45 kilograms carbon dioxide per unit per gallon. What's regular diesel fuel is 10.21 kilograms CO2 per gallon. Not a heck of a lot of difference, is there? Okay, to make these huge claims. Compressed natural gas, it's pretty much the same as diesel. And here is, again, one of these claims. I think this is greenwashing: powered by clean natural gas. Here is a life cycle for global warming conditions, or emissions, rather. Here's diesel fuel trucks. Here's natural gas. I mean, big whoop. It's not clean burning. That stuff kind of irks me a little bit. Okay, so in conclusion, there's a lot of information. I just touched on a bunch of stuff, a lot of details, a lot of regulations. I still don't know what subpart ZZZZ is, and I never will because I retired from environmental consulting. But I think you paralegals are in a great position to help out with all that. And with that, thank you all for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Oh, Charles, that was great. If you want to end your share screen so we can
Oh,
see
yeah,
everybody. No, that's fine. And that way I can see if there are any questions. But
sure.
while we get there, thank you, first of all.
Sure.
You clearly have a lot of passion for your industry, which is always something that I appreciate.
Oh,
Um,
you bet.
you
Let me ask you this. Oh, stop sharing.
There you
Okay,
go.
I
There
was
you
going to
go.
ask you, how do I stop sharing?
You got
Okay,
it. You got it. No. You're great.
thank
Um,
you.
that was really so much great information, and there were some things in there that have like come across my just regular life, and some things that were brand new. But in terms of the paralegal work, what type of offices would you, when you would work with attorneys' offices, were they corporate litigation? Were they large firms? Were they special? Like, where would a paralegal interested in this type of work go? Because this is
Sure.
way outside my realm.
Oh, sure. All of the above that you mentioned, we work for some of the top law firms in Detroit, the big names. They have, and some of them, 100 environmental lawyers in their office,
Yeah.
okay, if not 200. So that's one. There's small outfits, that again would hire, they can't figure all this stuff out, nor should they bother really. And so, um, probably even environmental consulting firms, I felt a little like I had to be a lawyer without going to law school. I'm
Sure.
like, I'm a geologist.
Well,
Why,
you had
why
to
am
know the
I?
codes and you had to know where to find
Yeah.
them. And right.
So there's just all kinds of room for people that know the law that can kind of guide certain things and interpret them. Corporations. I mean, I bet I have a friend that worked at Chrysler. I don't know what Chrysler is now. Is there still a Chrysler or whatever it's called?
Daimler, I've lost track
Stellantis.
as well. I
They
don't.
probably have 300, 200 environmental people in their environmental department.
Mhm.
So that's another one. There's just all kinds of stuff. Or name any company. In fact, we did a lot of work for some fairly large companies, but didn't have an environmental staff, and they're just winging it. And it's like, yikes. You saw these fines. They're real. $175,000 not getting an air permit for a boiler.
Right, right.
I
And
mean,
and then when you were working with these attorneys, and I'm assuming that you or your staff probably had some interactions with the paralegals, what type of work were the paralegals doing? Was it research? Was it reviewing documentation? Was it something else?
yeah. Well, kind of all of the above. And I think that you probably get a feel for the amount of detail that's involved with lab results and, especially even reviewing phase 1 environmental site assessments and just making sure that details are handled because you can spend $50,000 on a project. And if you don't look at the details, the data you got isn't any good, you know? So I would say, and this is good. I remember I was thinking of adding that clip from there's a movie, A Civil Action, okay, that I highly recommend folks get. It's a little dated. It has John Travolta in there, but anyway, it's a true story of a contaminated site in Woburn, Massachusetts, where W.R. Grace and Beatrice Foods had caused contamination of the water supply in a town north of Boston, Woburn. And it's a true story. The book is A Civil Action, if you'd rather read that. And that talks about the legal aspects and all the types of things related to that site. My boss at Environmental Resources Management in Boston was the head geologist for that project, drilling the wells and all that kind of thing. And when his name's John Durbinski, he's in the book. But when John found out they were going to make a movie out of A Civil Action, he got all excited. He's from Australia, and he was thinking maybe Mel Gibson would be cast as John, and I think it would have been disappointing they got some quirky British guy to be John Durbinski in the movie. But anyway, that goes through a lot of really cool legal stuff
Nice.
that folks might be interested in seeing, and highly recommend it.
Awesome. Abby, go ahead. Thanks.
Oh,
Cool. Hi. Hi,
hi,
Charles.
Abby. How are you?
Thanks. I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for the great presentation. I thought it was really interesting.
Good. Thank you.
And and I'm gonna have to jump off the call in about 5 minutes. So
Yeah, no,
I
we're wrapping up. Go ahead.
apologize.
Yep.
But my question is, I guess when you're in terms of Michigan or I guess federal certifications that maybe you've gone through or taken to help either learn the regulations or classwork you've done to help learn the regulations? Because I did like an industrial stormwater certification, and
Oh,
man, you're just like they're like, oh, you got to check here, you got to check here, and you open the document, it's like 200 pages, and so I know
yes.
it's extremely complicated.
Yes. Yes. Well, good for you getting that certification. Yeah. That's a really good question because at least my experience is there is no that I know of like clearinghouse to go in and get certified for being an expert in environmental regulations, um, other than maybe environmental law school or specializing in it. So it's usually what I like to do is get the regulation that a company might be responsible for. I talk directly with the agency, and that's their job. What is this subpart ZZZZ? Well, that was a bad example because they didn't know. But subpart JJJJJ, then what do you have to do? So it's kind of like piecemeal like that, unfortunately. But I think it's more an awareness, and you had a really good question that is like, what environmental regulations might apply to this process? making solar panels, making widgets, being a hospital. Even a hospital could use paralegal, I think, for tracking this kind of stuff. So it's more an awareness that I want to make sure I'm not missing something, you know? I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
I've got, I guess, a follow-up question. I was curious, as a consultant working with them, um, what happens if you do miss something? I mean, are you like, do you have all sorts of waivers that like you're probably going to miss
uh
something?
yeah, we usually change our license plates and change our names and leave town.
Move out of town,
No,
yeah.
no, I think that's a good question too, is we're so paranoid. And I can say in my 30 years, so paranoid knowing that stakes are so high that we don't miss anything, at least the firm I was with. Now, that's number one, is you can't afford to miss something, so you check it over a gazillion times. The other thing too is, like, let's say, and that's a really good question about doing a phase one environmental site assessment. You're looking at a piece of property and you're going by public records, aerial photography, old maps of the facility, records. Yeah, if you miss something that's just not in there, it's missed. So we have things in there and it's in the standard, the ASTM standard I mentioned. It says something to the effect that not in no investigation, no investigation can be absolutely certain that any recognized environmental conditions were found or some such thing. And so I put that in our report right up front.
The disclaimer, right? You always have to.
Yeah, because yeah.
Well, listen, I want to thank everyone for attending today, and Charles for the really just fabulous high level overview. And if anything, my takeaway from this, because this is, like I said, way outside of any practice areas that I was ever in, but in terms of how it relates to paralegals, it's document management and research, right? I mean, so
Yes.
just it's knowing where to look to find the information. So it doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily mean that I need to be a geology expert or a wastewater management expert, but I need to know where to find the regulations, and I would need to know, how those correspond to whatever the activity is. So that to me,
Right.
it opens up a lot of different areas. And then we were talking about emissions. Ironically, my husband works for General Motors, and he is the
Ah,
emissions guy at General
oh, neat.
Motors, right? And so I hear
Cool.
during COVID, I heard all his conversations, and I feel like I'm, a semi-expert now on the J 1979 dash
Yeah.
two. So
Yeah. Great.
I learned these things by osmosis. But carrying that forward, I saw one of your blog sections in there was with regard to hybrids. Now we're going to be in batteries, right? Where do these batteries go when they're done? They're not any cleaner than anything else. So
Right.
there's always going to be something new and new regulations and new requirements. And so that's just going to add to
Yeah.
the need for more attorneys and paralegals. So, I
Sure.
think
Sure. Sure.
there's a big,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you brought up a good point. And I'll just leave with this, that I know we're short on time, is like, yeah, looking at regulations and kind of, you know, like documents and so on. But I think a paralegal would be absolutely critical to just sort of be doing like a what if. Have we covered everything? What if there's a regulation to do with discharge to the ground or whatever? I
sure,
mean, that
sure.
sounds pretty simple, but always kind of asking and wondering if everything is covered, because you could be a real hero if you come up with something that nobody else had come up with. And believe me, there's lots of room for being a hero, because people are, especially when they're doing other things, not focused on all these environmental regulations, which I hope one of the things is like that I sort of presented is there's a huge amount, and there's not much sympathy or forgiveness from an agency if something was missed, like this hospital system. Oh, that's okay. You take care of patients. No, $175,000 fine. Pay up. You know, Jeez. So anyway, yeah, looking for details, always thinking, asking
Yeah.
questions, don't feel bad about that because that's what's needed.
Well, this was great, and I have a feeling I'll probably get some additional questions once this video is launched and other folks have a chance. And Charles, you and I are going to continue our relationship as well.
Right.
I have definitely been taking a look at the syllabus that you had prepared, and I would
Oh, yeah.
love to talk about maybe incorporating some sort of environmental special topic into our program. So I just
Okay,
want to thank you for
cool.
your time.
Well, thank you for mentioning that, and I've had a lot of fun doing this, and
Awesome.
I've had so much experience. I've been looking for a place to like do an
Yeah.
information
Yeah.
dump, and it's not for the geologists. They're like, we want to learn about dirt. So I'm glad
Yeah.
that
We found it. We found
we're
an
talking.
avenue, a venue for you.
Yeah.
All
So go
right.
Lions too,
Go
right?
Lions. And thank you so much. Stay warm, everybody, and
Thank
take care.
thank you all. Have a great weekend.